I won't do this. I'm sorry. 7 words. That's all she left me with. No call, no explanation sitting across a table where I could watch her face and understand something. 7 words in a text message sent from a parking lot while I was still inside asking about chair arrangements. My name is Stephen Harps. I am an architect. I design structures that are meant to last. Buildings that absorb pressure, distribute weight, and stand through conditions they were never warned about in advance. I have spent my entire adult life learning how to make things hold. I did not know, until that afternoon, that I had applied none of that knowledge to myself. The coordinator's name was Patricia. She was mid-sentence about centerpiece options. We have the ivory cascade or the champagne cluster, and most couples find the cascade photographs better near water. When I registered that Jenna's chair was empty. Not just that she had stepped away. Empty in the way that carries information. Her purse was gone. Her champagne glass was still on the table, still fizzing at the rim, and there was something deeply wrong about that. Something still alive in a space she had already left. I read the text once. Then again. My phone was warm in my hand from being in my jacket pocket, and I remember that detail with a clarity I don't fully understand. The warmth, the fizzing glass, Patricia still talking. I let her finish her sentence. That was not composure. I want to be honest about that. It was not strength or dignity or any of the words people would later use when I told this story. It was simply that I did not yet have a language for what was happening inside my chest, and until I found one, I defaulted to manners. Cancel everything. I said it the way I say most things, evenly. Patricia blinked at me the way people do when they've heard the words, but the meaning hasn't reached them yet. Excuse me? And I understood her confusion. We had been sitting at that table for 40 minutes, and 40 minutes ago, I was a man with a color-coded spreadsheet of vendor contacts and a printed seating chart with handwritten notes in the margins. Jenna had written 2 of the vendor names herself, in her slanted, fast handwriting, the kind she used when she was excited about something. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I thanked Patricia for her time, which I now recognize was possibly unhinged in its politeness, and I walked out through the venue's main entrance into the afternoon light. I did not run to the parking lot to see if Jenna's car was still there. I already knew it wasn't. I drove home at the speed limit. Both hands on the wheel. Radio off. And somewhere on that 20-minute drive, a thought arrived quietly, the way structurally significant thoughts always do. She didn't stumble out of that meeting. She planned to leave before she walked in. Please, before I continue, kindly like, share, and subscribe for more interesting stories. I have one memory of my father that I return to more than any other. I was 14. It was a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because my mother had made the specific dinner she always made on Tuesdays, a pot roast that took all afternoon, and the smell of it filled the whole house like a promise. My father came home from work, and something had gone wrong in his day, something I never learned the details of, and he walked into that kitchen and destroyed the next 3 hours with his voice alone. No fists. Raymond Harps never needed fists. He had volume, and he had the specific talent of knowing exactly which words would find the softest place in a person and press there until something gave. My mother developed a tremor in her left hand that year, a fine, barely visible shake that appeared when she was tired or frightened and never fully went away. She still has it. I notice it every time I visit. I decided at 14, quietly, with the certainty of a person making a structural decision rather than an emotional one, that I would never be that man. I would find another way to carry the weight. I would be still. I would absorb. I would not detonate. What I did not understand until I was sitting in my own driveway at 34 years old, staring at the dashboard of my car with a text message on my phone, and 6 years of my life quietly rearranging themselves around a new reality, is that stillness is not the same as strength. Sometimes it is just damage that learned better posture. I sat in that driveway for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the dash without meaning to, the way you watch something when your eyes need somewhere to go. I thought about the Rooftop Design Expo in Atlanta, where I met Jenna 3 years after she'd ended things with a man whose name I now knew better than I ever wanted to. She had paint on her jacket sleeve, cadmium yellow, the kind that doesn't wash out, and she was laughing at something someone had said, and I remember thinking, not that she was beautiful, though she was, but that she seemed like a person who was fully occupying her own life. That was the thing. She was present in a way that felt rare. I listened to her for 45 minutes that night without checking my phone. She told me later that was the thing. That was what got her. I wish I had known then what that sentence would eventually cost me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Jenna again. "Stephen, please let me explain." I set the phone face down on the passenger seat. Went inside. Made coffee. The kitchen counter held a handwritten list of vendors, her handwriting on 2 of them, fast and slanted. I opened the junk drawer and placed the list inside and closed it without force. Then I called my attorney. Derek's condo smelled like cedar and something expensive trying too hard. He made his speech with his hands clasped and his eyes steady, and every word landed exactly where he intended it to. He said he'd wasted years understanding what he'd lost. He said her name twice in one sentence, like it was something he'd been saving. I wasn't there, but Jenna told me everything later, in the way people confess things when the damage is already done, and honesty becomes the only currency left. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He flipped it face down before she could read the screen. She noticed. She said nothing. She filed it. Later, she excused herself to the bathroom. She knew his phone password. He'd shown her carelessly months ago during one of their gray zone catch-up calls that she hadn't told me about. She opened his Instagram, found a contact labeled T, found 3 messages, found the last one sent 2 days before he called her. "She's coming, just give me a week." She put the phone down, washed her hands, looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment, walked back out smiling. I called Grant at 11 that night. Not because I was falling apart and needed someone to talk to. Grant is a contracts attorney, not a therapist, and I respected that boundary for both our sakes. I called because I needed to understand the structural damage, venue deposit, photographer retainer, catering hold. I took notes in the margins of a blank page, clean and organized, because that was what I had. Then Grant mentioned Derek Voss. Casually. The Meridian Downtown Project, mixed-use development, significant contract, 2 competing bids. Derek's company had submitted theirs 2 weeks prior. Mine was better by every measurable metric, but filed late. I asked how much time remained to revise and refile. 48 hours. I told Grant I'd have revised documents by morning. I hung up and looked at my blueprints spread across the desk and understood something about myself in that moment that I hadn't fully articulated before. I did not want to destroy Derek Voss. I simply wanted to beat him on a surface where quality was the only thing that mattered, where cutting corners was visible, where the better structure won. I worked until 4 in the morning. Jenna woke up in Derek's guest room to coffee smell and morning light and approximately 4 minutes of something that felt like peace. He made eggs. He sat across from her and was warm and unhurried and present in the specific way she had always fantasized he could be. She thought, maybe I didn't make a mistake. His phone rang. He took it to the balcony. She watched through the glass and studied his body the way you study something you once knew by heart. His spine straightened. One hand moved through his hair, the posture of a man absorbing accountability from a direction he hadn't expected. He came back in. "Contractor, sorry. On a Saturday morning?" He smiled. "You know how it is." She did know. She knew exactly how it was because she'd been T in someone else's story once, hadn't she? The person on the other end of a call that got explained away as something logistical, something minor, something that didn't mean what it looked like. That evening, she texted Stephen for the 4th time. He didn't respond, and the silence felt different than she'd expected. Not cold, heavy. Dolores had been doing weddings for 31 years. She picked up my cancellation call on the 2nd ring like she'd been expecting it, which I later decided said something true about the nature of wedding florists. They see enough beginnings to develop a feel for endings. I was professional, efficient, apologetic in the way I do most things, which is to say, structurally rather than emotionally. She listened. Then she said, Can I ask you something, sweetheart? I told her to go ahead. Did she leave or did she run? Because those are two different things. A woman who leaves knows where she's going. A woman who runs doesn't. 4 seconds of silence on my end. Cancel the order, Dolores. I will, but I'm keeping your deposit on hold for 30 days. Old habit. She hung up before I could argue. I sat with my phone in my hand and felt something move through my chest that I had been successfully holding at a distance for 36 hours. Not grief exactly, something more architectural than that. The specific feeling of looking at a load-bearing wall and realizing it was never structural to begin with. Trisha called on hour 60, unknown number. Jenna almost didn't answer. Jenna, this is Trisha Voss. The room got very small, very fast. Trisha spoke for 4 minutes without raising her voice once. No performance, no bitterness dressed up as concern. Just the clean, careful truth of a woman who had already survived the specific wreckage Jenna was currently standing inside. He called me last week, after he called you. He told me he needed closure. He has a type, women who almost got away. Jenna looked through the kitchen doorway, Derek on the couch, relaxed, TV on. He doesn't want you because he loves you. He wants you because you were about to belong to someone else permanently. He can't stand that. Jenna's hand pressed flat against the counter. I'm not calling to hurt you. I'm calling because I wish someone had called me. The call ended. She stood in that kitchen for 2 full minutes and felt the truth arrive in her body before her mind had finished processing it. She hadn't run toward Derek. She had run away from the floor plan. She picked up her keys. She walked toward the front door and Derek looked up from the television and said casually, "Where are you going?" She stopped, turned around. "Who is T in your DMs?" His face did 3 things in 1 second. Froze, calculated, recovered. "What are you talking about?" She didn't raise her voice. Something in the last 72 hours had rearranged her entirely. She had never in her life stayed quiet when she wanted to scream, and she was doing it now, and it felt like borrowed behavior, like something she'd absorbed from a man she'd left sitting at a table with a color-coded spreadsheet. Derek talked for 6 minutes. The explanation was technically coherent and completely hollow. He used the phrase, "I was protecting you from stress." A sentence construction she recognized because she had once used it on herself, about him, years ago, to justify staying. She listened to every word. Then, "I left a man who never lied to me, to come back to a man who can't stop." She walked out. Derek called after her. Then she heard him, through the closing door, pick up his phone, not to call her back. I was at my desk at 11 p.m. when my phone lit up with her name. I watched it ring, 4 times, 5. I declined the call. She tried again, 30 seconds later. Straight to voicemail. She didn't leave a message the first time, the second time she did, and I didn't listen to it that night, or the next morning, or for 3 days after. Not out of cruelty, I want to be precise about this, but because I understood instinctively that hearing her voice before I had fully processed what she'd done would compromise something I needed to keep intact. My father used to say that a man who can't control his response to pain has no business being in charge of anything. It was one of the only useful things he ever gave me, delivered carelessly, the way he gave most things. I sat at my desk in the silence after the second call and thought about Dolores. Did she leave, or did she run? I thought about what it meant that I was sitting here asking that question at all, that some part of me was already sorting through the rubble for anything worth keeping. I went back to my blueprints. Derek called me at 8 in the morning, unknown number, but Grant had mentioned his name 40 hours ago, and I had looked up his company the same night, the way you assess a structure before you decide whether to build next to it. Stephen Harps? Yes. This is Derek Voss. I think we need to... I know who you are. Brief silence. I heard him recalibrate. Derek Voss was a man who led with warmth and pivoted to pressure when warmth failed. He tried warmth first. Look, I just want to clear the air, man, I filed a counterbid on the Meridian downtown project yesterday morning. My attorney expects the review board's decision by end of week. Complete silence. I waded through it without filling it. Was there something else? He hung up. I set my phone down and returned to the site elevation drawings on my desk. I had not called him to wound him. I had called, or rather answered, because I needed him to understand something fundamental. I did not operate on the same surface he did. Where he cut corners, I built clean. The better structure always wins. It just sometimes takes longer to be seen. She knew my schedule the way you know the layout of a house you lived in long enough for it to become unconscious. I'm at the office by 7:30. Staff arrives at 9. She got there at 8:55 and my assistant, who had known Jenna for 4 years and said absolutely nothing, which I have always respected, let her through. I looked up from my desk. I did not stand, did not close my laptop, did not say her name first. Stephen. Jenna. Whatever she'd rehearsed dissolved. I watched it happen. I made a terrible mistake. I know. I'm not asking you to forgive me today. I'm asking if there's a version of this where, why did you leave? Not angry, structural, like checking a load-bearing wall before deciding whether the building still stands. She answered with the truth she'd found in a parking garage at 11 p.m. I wasn't running toward him. I was scared of how permanent you are. I closed my laptop. You were scared of permanence, and you handled that fear by detonating 6 years. I stood up. I need you to leave, Jenna. She did. The Meridian contract came through on a Thursday. Derek Voss's underbid was flagged in the review board's findings. Corners cut, materials misrepresented, numbers that didn't survive scrutiny. His company lost the contract. 3 weeks later, 2 subcontracts followed it out the door. Jenna went back to her apartment, back to work. She texted me every few days, not begging, nothing theatrical, just small, honest things. Evidence of someone becoming more careful with themselves. I read every one. I responded to roughly 1 in 4. 3 months passed, the way months do when you're building something and watching it slowly become what it was meant to be. One morning, I drove past the wedding venue on the way to the Meridian site. I didn't slow down. I didn't feel what I expected to feel, which had been braced for something sharp. It was quieter than that, more like a scar than a wound. Present, visible, but no longer the thing requiring the most attention. That evening, I called Dolores. Release the deposit, Dolores. Which option, sweetheart? Refund or hold? 3 seconds of silence. Hold. I hung up, sat with the word. Some structures aren't demolished. They're simply paused while the architect decides whether the foundation is still worth trusting. I hadn't decided yet, but I was still standing at the blueprints.